Hi, friends. It's Steve DePaul here with the Rose Realty team. Here today with our real estate vlog for North Texas. Today, we're going to talk about DIY, do-it-yourself projects that have gone wrong. Now, the 3 out of the 4 of these come from a friend of mine who's an investor. He buys kind of fixer-uppers, invests in them, and then he rents them out. So he becomes a landlord. He's shared his problems with me. He's let me use his examples, although I'm not going to use his name. But 3 of the 4 of these are sort of his handiwork. So let's kind of get into it. So at one point in one of his rentals, he decided to put in a high-end refrigerator and in the kitchen. And so he puts in the high-end refrigerator, and then he says, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to expand the size of the kitchen counter to have like this little peninsula sticking out to the side. So he goes through the effort. He puts in a cost. He puts in a cabinet. He extends the island kind of around the side. You can see that in this picture, but there's a problem. Now, if you take a close look at this picture, you can see that in order for him to have to get, if there was a problem, in order for him to have to get that refrigerator out of the kitchen, like let's say we broke down and he had to replace it, 5 years from now. If it's a Samsung, 2 years from now, right? If he has to replace that, he's got to go out and hire like 4 brawny guys to pick that refrigerator up over the island peninsula that's sticking out there in order to get it out of the kitchen. You can't, there's no place else to do. There's no place else to slide it. And so he thought of the island. He moved in the refrigerator. He thought of that little peninsula thing, but didn't think about the next 4 steps. What happens if the refrigerator breaks down? So there's one for you. You got to think ahead, right? You can't just think, you got to think like 10 steps ahead. You just can't think of, well, now I'm planning the thing and I got the thing designed and I got the thing built. That's outstanding. Now what do I do? Now we just go out and, live a happy life. What happens if is the next questions that you have to ask. So don't go down the cheapest, don't go down the cheapest option. I've kind of preached about this a little bit for like the last couple of years when we're talking about renovations, specifically in the kitchen. And there's a kitchen example coming up, but here's another example that'll kind of knock your socks off based on my buddy here. So he needed a new range hood in one of his rentals. Okay, so he's got his eye on one. It's about an $800 hood. He really doesn't want to spend that much money. But then he finds another one on Amazon. No disrespect to Amazon, for about $250. Okay. So he goes out and buys it, has it installed. In this particular case, has it installed. And about a year later, the thing's dead. It just goes out on the fritz. He's got to replace this range hood now, right? So now he's got to go through extra expense for a new hood, okay? But then because it's not the exact same size and model and style and all of that, he's got to go through drywall and and new electricity and poking a different hole in the wall in a different area to take the exhaust out. I mean, so going with, so it's not just the cost of the item itself or the appliance itself, that in this case was a poor choice, but because he went with the cheaper option, what ended up happening is the thing fritzed. And then he had to go through replacements, and he had to go in do a lot of other work to get the thing to work and look properly. So the cheapest option in terms of materials or appliances, kind of should raise a red flag to you. Specialty work seeks specialty advice. So one of his rentals, he had a dining room, okay, and that dining room had like a 2-way entry. You could enter the dining room from here or from here, right? And so he puts in a new chandelier because he thought it would be nice, and because it was kind of like a high-end rental. And he thinks what would be really cool would be to put in dimmer switches at each entrance, right? And so he puts in these dimmer switches and he's blowing fuses. He's working on this thing for like, 2 or 3 hours, blowing fuses, like every couple of minutes, every time he tries to flick on the switch and then use the dimmer. So he ends up calling the manufacturer and he finds out what? He finds out that he can't have two dimmer switches on the same circuit for this particular chandelier. Okay. So in this case, it's important to look ahead to see whether, I don't know whether the dimmer switches for him was sort of a whim at the time, or he really thought, geez, we can do this, we can do this, it's not a problem. But what ended up obviously happening is he ended up, messing it up and blew a lot of fuses, and he had to eventually take one of the dimmer switches out and replace it with a normal switch. So when you buy something to do in your DIY project, you got to kind of read. I hate to say it, guys. I know I'm the same way. You have to read all the instructions to see whether two dimmer switches or whatever we're talking about here are going to work in your particular situation or your particular plant. And then DIY is great, but like not do it on a holiday. So this isn't that same guy, but this is a friend of his, because he had a lot of rentals, and he had this particular rental in a condo unit. Okay, so condo unit, everything is kind of run by the HOA. You pay your water bill, your electric bill, your whatever, blah blah blah, through the HOA. Okay, so what ended up happening is this particular guy wanted to put a cabinet above the toilet in the guest bathroom. Okay, and so he goes up there and he measures and all of that. Well, what ends up happening is he ends up breaking the pipe, that's coming into the unit. Okay, it's like an older building. It's an older unit. The pipe was somewhat rusty. Okay, that doesn't excuse what happened, but he ends up breaking the pipe. Okay, water squirting out all over the place. As a matter of fact, the story this guy tells is that the water hit him in the chest and knocked him against the wall, behind him there, right? So now what does he got to do? Now he's got to shut off the water. Luckily for him, for his particular unit, he was on the first floor. Okay, so there's not going to be much, there's going to be flooding down to the basement, but not down into other people's apartments or other people's condos, right? And so we had to go down there and shut off the water. Unfortunately, the way this particular building was set up, he had to shut off the water for every one of the units in his building, and it happened to be like 4th of July weekend. Okay, and so number one, he's got to now call he calls the condo association, who gets him an emergency plumber over there, who's now charging him like triple time, to come over there and do the job. And guess what? The plumber's like pissed because he wants to be home drinking beer, cooking hot dogs with his family, who would blame him. Okay, the plumber kind of rushes through the job, does a poor job, basically puts a Band-Aid on it, but then he's got to come back like in 3 months to fix what he should have fixed correctly, the first time, and it was just a mess. So DIY projects are great. You can do them, if you have the expertise, but not on a holiday, or maybe not on a weekend where you're going to have to pay somebody to come and fix your problem, and you have to pay them triple time or more in order to fix your problem. So I hope that maybe scared you out of doing some DIY projects, or at least planning ahead to make sure that you had the plan worked out. Maybe the phone numbers written down so that you can call for help should you need it. Next week, we're going to kind of talk about the same kind of thing in a way. We're going to talk about remodeling mistakes next week. This is Steve. I'm with the Rose Realty team. I'm out.